recorded. Okay. Get my windows open. There's people joining. Hey, Nick. Hey, Jackson. Cool. Jacob, thanks for joining me, dude.
Glad to be here.
How you doing?
Fantastic.
Cool. So we just had a brief chat off air. So what we can do is give you all like a few more minutes to filter them, but just to obviously remind everybody that these sessions all are like recorded and posted straight after the fact. So I know that we had one session about an hour before this one. So people will be catching up on this and maybe doing one session rather than another one and then watching the replay one. So we are good to go. Jacob, I could do a butchered introduction of yourself, but we can know you as a co-founder of Comsort as well as community club, etc., all-round lifelong community builder extraordinaire with fingers in many pies, I'm sure. How about you give the complete lowdown of who you are, what you do, and how you ended up here today?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tom. I've been building communities since I was as old as I could play with Lego bricks. And that's actually how I got into the world of community building back in the day. I realized that there was a big adult online world of people that were over the age of 8 years old playing with the little plastic building block toys. And I've been a lifelong community builder and community member of various different groups online ever since. I kind of approach community building from, I think, a different angle and different background than most, and that's more from the quantitative and mathematical side. So by trade and by background, I'm actually a quant and a data scientist. So I started off my career working at a big bank as an investment analyst, and that one thing led to another. And next thing I know, I'm running one of New York City's largest communities of quants and data scientists. So I got the blend of the quant and the qual in a mixture of a collision of worlds.
So that's like a bit of a different side, especially like now. We can kind of dive into this in a minute, but yeah, you're coming from it from a completely different angle.
Exactly. I think most people approach community building from more of like a psychological and like a relationship, like a human-based aspect. But for me, it's a lot more about math.
Nice. And is that reflected in Comsor by any chance?
It just might be. So Comsor is the community management software that I co-founded with my buddy Mac, who's also speaking at a MakerPad session next week, about 2 years ago. And we're building software for community teams. It's kind of like the back-end management layer to get an understanding of the health of your community, measure engagement. It's essentially a full stack analytics and CRM platform for your community.
Amazing. So what are we going to be talking about today?
So I've got an awesome surprise for you guys. Let me share my screen and we can dive right in.
Nice. And as usual, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to throw them in the chat, throw them in the Q&A, and I can be the interrupter for you and ask away any questions. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A. If you do want to ask anything like face to face, you can raise your hand and we can do that also. Make this like conversation as interactive as possible, as obviously this is gauged for you guys who are out there kind of building your communities from the bottom up. So any questions you have about anything, fire away and we'll make sure we get them answered for you.
Thanks, Tom. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. So today we're going to talk about how to tactically and practically build and run a highly engaged Slack community. Now, there's an important caveat though. I'd say 80% of the tips and tricks that we're going to walk through, you could actually probably apply to any community tool and any community platform. There are a few specific quirks to Slack in general, but I think by and large, the people that you're amassing in your community and like the purpose and the reason for which they're gathering is actually much more important than the platform in the long run. So a bit about me. Tom kind of stole my thunder and stole my fire here because I had an introduction slide planned in the deck, so we can gloss over this, but I am someone that always fills out my Slack profile. And we actually have data from a community that I run to suggest that members who fill out their profile completely in Slack, or maybe even it applies to other community tools and platforms, are actually within the first week are 3 times more likely to engage throughout the lifetime of their membership in the community than if they didn't.
I didn't know that. That's a really interesting stat.
Yeah, I mean, just think about it, right? It kind of sets the tone for their level of engagement with the community moving forward, right? It's like if you can get them to put in just that little bit of amount of effort in the very beginning, they're much more likely to stick around and continue putting in that much effort, if not exponentially more effort moving forward.
I guess like having the profile picture sorted, like, so you're not like just a random like avatar is probably key. But I guess, yeah, filling out that what you do and other info is probably even more important.
Exactly. Nobody likes an egghead or like avatar.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
And if you guys want to connect after this, you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm always on there tweeting about community stuffs. And speaking of Twitter, I think it's an important delineation and distinction to draw between platforms like that, which are a little bit more audience and broadcast based, as opposed to something like Slack, which is much more intimate. It's many to many, and there's actually connections between and among members. And I know we talked a bit at the beginning that I like to approach community from more of a mathematical angle. And a really simple way to illustrate this is if you compare something like a newsletter or Twitter or Instagram or a podcast with a many-to-many community experience like Slack or like WhatsApp or like Discord. And that's the fact that in a audience or a broadcast tool like the ones that I just mentioned, it's one-to-one relationships between the like creator or the podcaster or the tweeter and the followers or the listeners, right? So if you had 500 Twitter followers, that's 500 one-to-one connections. But if you had 500 people in a Slack community, right, that's a many-to-many experience, all of a sudden, each one of those people can connect with 499 of the others. So if you do the combinatorial permutations of different ways in which people could connect with one another, 500 community members in a Slack group is actually like 62,000 different unique connections, which is exponentially more than 500 people that could follow you on Twitter.
Interesting. Yeah, this is kind of a bit of like a follow-on from a couple of the sessions we've had previously, which are kind of just like expanding on the point of building those one-to-one connections that are really, really important to start with, to actually solidify people, say, like around your mission. But then it's important to keep in mind how that transitions when the community grows.
Exactly. In the early days, the majority of the connections are between you as the community leader or the organizer and the members, but you need to scale that really fast and get the members talking to one another, play on the exponential math that's available to you.
Got it.
So let's keep moving on. So you're probably like, what the heck does this guy know, right? He started a few dozen communities. He started a community software platform. Why should we listen to his authority on how to build a Slack group? Well, let's just say I might know a thing or two. This is a true fact. I actually am a member of over 200 Slack communities, but I gotta say, I don't check all 200 every single day. In fact, I probably only check like 3 to 4, and then maybe 20 to 30 semi-regularly, like once or twice a month, because otherwise it's completely unsustainable. But I'm kind of like a Slack community addict, if you will.
I didn't know you actually could join that many Slack communities.
It's pretty ridiculous. And here's the thing, you can join that many, but your computer won't like you, because there are multiple times I had to go in and prune different communities I'm a part of because my Slack app on my desktop keeps crashing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think Slack would probably handle that many, or is built to accommodate a user like you.
Well, so I actually have a friend who works on the Slack engineering team and kind of their internal BI function, and apparently I'm like 0.0001% of the top of their leaderboard in terms of people that are in the most Slack communities with the most unique Slack profiles for one email address.
Wow, got it.
So that's a stat category that I never thought I'd be a part of if you would have asked me 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
But I think the $1 million question that you guys are probably all wondering, if you don't already run a Slack community today, and that's, is Slack the right community choice for your operation or for your group? And I want to answer that with a bit of a controversial statement. And that's that it's not about the community tool. It's actually more about how you use it. Now, Slack has a lot of things going for it, and there's a lot of reasons why you see successful communities built on Slack. And one of the largest is actually this concept of like a re-engagement loop, right? So a lot of people that are joining Slack communities or that will join a Slack community are already using something like Slack for work, right? So it's familiar to them. They have it on their cell phone, they have it on their desktop app. And when it comes to having an app that's that close to you already, it's pretty powerful because people only on average download like 1 to 3 new apps a year on their smartphones, as an example. And I think it's right around the same for desktop. So if you're already baked into somebody's habit flow and their workflow, it's actually really low friction to get them to re-engage or to keep coming back for more or to learn. They basically don't have to learn, all the ins and outs of learning a new tool or a new platform if they're already comfortable with it for work. So I think that's generally one of the strongest draws of something like Slack. Now, it obviously has a lot of downfalls, right? Because at the end of the day, Slack is an enterprise communication tool. That's what they say they're all about. That's what the feature set is built around. So it wasn't purpose built for communities. But I'd like to say that I think the whole concept of like a re-engagement loop and familiarity, and the fact that like Slack oftentimes for professionals is already built into their daily and weekly habit flow and their workflow, and it's on their computers and on their phones, that's actually much more powerful than any enhanced features or functionality that a purpose-built community tool or a purpose-built community platform could offer you.
Yeah, that's interesting because we obviously started the MakePad community, and the MakePad community obviously grew up as on Slack. Like that's where members were in until recently, where we moved over to Circle a few months ago when that launched, and completely, like you said, like completely different tools have completely different functionality. But I think, yeah, to develop the community, you actually have to reach a point where you make that decision. I think you could start a community like on any platform. And is it more to do, is like you said, is it more of a preference to start something on a platform with the least amount of friction, perhaps? And before you answer that, if anyone's got any questions with relation to starting a community on a different platform and maybe thinking about either starting it on Slack, like Comsor or Circle or Name Your Mighty Networks, any of these other community-based platforms, if anyone's thinking about this, what are you thinking about? So is there trade-offs that you want to ask about? Let us know in the chat. But yeah, what is it about the friction of communities that's kind of a blocker or that makes it easy?
You just want to make things as easy as possible for people, and any artificial blocker, even if it's something like having to learn a new tool and adopt something into your habit flow, it's massive. You just can't underestimate that. I mean, it's why people are still building successful communities on Facebook. It's because 2 billion people in the world have a Facebook account, and people check Facebook almost every single day in a lot of cases for pleasure or for leisure. So it's already built into their daily habit flow. Even though arguably Facebook, is a monster when it comes to data privacy, and it lacks a lot of functionality to make the lives easy for community leaders and community managers. But that's the reason.
Yeah, so a good example would be we had Steph Smith, previous session, who runs the Hustle and Trends, and they are exclusive to Facebook groups. Like completely lacks anything in terms of like integration and a lot of functionality, but people are there.
Let's see, my slides messed up here. Let me go back to full screen. Should be fixed for you guys.
There you go.
Yeah. So let's keep moving. How do you go about picking a tool? And if Slack's not right for you, what other tools are out there? And the crazy thing is there's an absolute dizzying array of different choices. This is a market map that we compiled a few months ago. The list has now over 200 tools and growing. And Tom, I think you have a link to the Airtable document, which actually has a list of every single community tool that's in this graphic that you see here. If you could pop that in the Zoom chat for people, that would be awesome. And a fun fact here is that over 100 of these tools, it's like 50%, were created in the past 3 years. So this market is exploding, and I very much expect it to be 10x in 3 years from now. So given this landscape, how do you even begin to think about, is something like Slack the best choice for me when there's so many options that you can go through? And again, I'll go back to the sticking point, which is that it's not about the community tool. It's really more about how you use it. But a few kind of mental frameworks that I would also start to wrap your head around to help make sense of this and figure out where you want to start, and if Slack's right for you, that might be helpful, is number one, think about where your users already are, right? So if your community is moms or baby boomers in terms of the age demographic, Facebook might be best for you because people are already spending a lot of time there. And as we discussed, the re-engagement loop is super powerful. If your audience is Gen Z, it's video gamers, it's people that are more in the tech world, something like Discord could be great for you. If it's B2B professionals that work at tech companies or they're marketers, Slack might be the obvious choice because they're already spending a lot of time there for there for work. WhatsApp, you could talk about it for the same reasons, because oftentimes people use WhatsApp for leisure, to communicate with their family or their friends and people on their network. So I think you really want to take a long, hard look and think at who your users are, where they're already spending time, and if you can leverage the fact that there's a low friction entry point to starting on a platform that they're already familiar with and using every single day or every single week. So that's I think framework number one, to start to make sense of this madness of platform and tool choices that are out there. The second is you want to meet your users on the same wavelength. And what I mean by that
Can
is
I just ask a question just before you go into point two? Is on the flip side of the first point you made of going where your audience is, like, makes complete sense. When would it make sense not to do that?
That's a great question. I think the best time to go where your audience isn't is if you're truly breaking new ground, right? And you're able to offer, and this is actually framework point number 3, which I'm going to get to in a sec, but it's where you're able to offer much more than just a many-to-many chat or a discussion experience. MakerPad's a great example of that, right? Before MakerPad, there really in fact, there still aren't that many places to go if you want to get a full stack education on no code, right? So they're very much in a new industry. It's a new space. They're breaking new ground. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense to go with a platform like Circle, especially if the target audience is much more open to trying new things. I mean, the whole purpose of the MakerPad community is to try new no-code tools. So people are very much open to trying and downloading new things and tinkering and figuring out how to hook different apps together. So I think you really just have to know your audience and think, okay, if I'm breaking new ground here, does it make sense to go with a brand new tool that they're going to have to learn and figure out a way to adopt into their workflow and their habit flow?
Got it.
So the second point I was going to make is that, like, you really want to meet users on the same wavelength. So you have to think long and hard, what's the purpose and reason for which people are gathering? And you might not need a Slack community. You might not need a group chat. You might not need many-to-many communication to keep a glue between folks. Sometimes a newsletter or a periodic virtual event or a virtual happy hour or a virtual conference is enough to suffice. And that's the only thing that a lot of people need. I've seen a lot of conferences that are oftentimes like a community for a day, right? Or community for a 2-day period, where it's a bunch of people gathering for a specific purpose once or twice a year. And now they're launching digital communities to try to keep the conversation happening 24/7 and keep things going between the conferences. But I've also seen a lot of those communities fail and flounder and not get a lot of re-engagement, because people were often used to gathering for a very specific point in time moment. They were used to having community for a day, right? That's what an event, that's what a conference is. But as soon as you try to introduce a new paradigm, it can be challenging. So you really have to know your audience, know the frequency, know the wavelength, and meet them at the right cadence, or else you're going to introduce an experience that users just don't want, or it just doesn't make sense based on the purpose and reason for which you're gathering.
Got it. Yeah, that is really interesting. I like how you frame that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the third and most important points is illustrated by this tweet that I sent out a few weeks ago, and that's that community is not a one-size-fits-all model. You have to be comfortable with the fact that there's no such thing as a perfect solution or a perfect tool out there. People oftentimes think that if they write down all the desired features that they want and profile their community target persona perfectly, that they're going to find this like Goldilocks zone and intersection of different features and tools that are going to be perfect for their audience members. And I'd say that that's disillusionment, because there really is no such thing as the perfect tool. It's all about how you use it. It's not the community tool. It's about how you use it. So you have to be comfortable with this fact. And another thing is that—
sorry to butt in again. Would you say it's also less important with regards to the tool when you are just starting out, say when you've got a small community?
I'd say yes and no. So yes, it doesn't matter as much with the tool, but at the same time, like once you choose a set of tools, it can be hard to change, right? And I think MakerPad migrating from Slack to Circle was a masterclass in making that work effectively, because I've seen a number of different communities try exactly that, move from something like Slack to Circle, and it was a nightmare, and they ended up going back to Slack for a lot of different reasons. So I think it doesn't matter, but at the same time, like you want to be cautious of locking people into an experience, and then with the intention of changing later once things start to scale. And before you even think about choosing a platform and a tool, I think it's oftentimes people jump too quickly to the tool and the solution and go, okay, I want to start a Slack, or I want to start this. And I really don't think you should start with the solution in mind. You should think about what type of value you want to bring to folks, what type of person you're going after. And like I said, what's the cadence and communication and wavelength that you want to meet people on before. And one of the best ways to do that before, putting, elbow grease into this and actually getting a community platform or tool up and running is just create a simple one-pager. 3 sections. What's the mission and purpose? What's the mission statement of the community? Who's the target persona that you're going after? What's the value they're going to get out of the community? What can they expect in terms of traditions and content and experience? And why are they going to keep coming back for more? And if you can outline that, it's like 10 to 12 sentences, and then send it to 10 prospective community members. It'll take you 30 minutes to do. It'll take you an hour to collect the feedback. And you're going to have a much better idea of what tools and platform choices and experiences you want to create for folks, kind of by test driving it before you actually have the rubber meet the road.
Good tip.
Yeah. So if the tool doesn't matter all that much, let's look at a few examples. I mean, there's like tons of crazy forums on the internet that are thriving, even though objectively the tooling and the user experience is garbage, right? It's stuck in 2004. And I think this just further illustrates and hammers home the point that like, it's not about the tool, it's more about how you use it. It's all about the purpose and the reason for which people are gathering and the people that you're bringing together than the platform. So people and purpose over platform, I think is a good way to remember this. I used to live in New York, and say I got invited to an amazing event at the 50th floor of the Empire State Building. The room had all the amazing accoutrements, like an ice sculpture, amazing views, a smoke machine, drinks, open bar. But I get there, I don't know anybody. Nobody is clear on the reason in which we're gathering. There's no MC, there's no host. That's not a great experience. Like, you could have the fanciest community platform with all the bells and whistles, but if people don't have a strong tie to one another or a clear purpose and reason for gathering, or an understanding of why they're there and what they can expect, it's not gonna resonate with folks, right? So to draw a parallel to that example, being on top of the 50th floor of the Empire State and having an amazing room, but a terrible community experience, you could be in a shitty dive bar with 10 of your best friends or 10 people that just went through an amazing shared life experience with you, or they share a similar identity, and you're all celebrating a milestone. And it doesn't matter the fact that the drinks taste terrible, like dumpster water, or the fact that the floors are made of sawdust, or that it smells bad, right? Like, you just care about the people and the purpose and the reason that you're there. So just compare that analogy to a community platform or community tool, and like, it doesn't matter about all the bells and whistles. It really fundamentally matters much more about the purpose and reason for gathering and the types of people that you're bringing together and the shared identity that you're locking into.
In addition to Tweaktown and daily writing tips, I think Bitcoin Talk will be a really good example of that. I mean, actually going on those forums is absolutely wild to think that people are still using that in 2020. So, I love that analogy about the bar.
I used to be really into crypto, so don't pull me down that rabbit hole. It could be dangerous.
Okay, yeah, let's not talk about that.
So let's say you ultimately decide to go with Slack, right? Because that's the purpose of this presentation. I built a number of Slack communities over the years, so hopefully there's a few helpful tidbits and tricks that I can share. But one thing that I want to start off with is that if you're going to start a community on Slack, don't take the 2, 3, 5, 6, 12-month view. Take the 2-year, 3-year view. And what I mean by that is, how is your community going to evolve beyond a Slack? You don't want to start a Slack group. You want to start a thriving community. You want to start a series of different experiences that members are going to keep coming back to. And Slack can be a great foundation for that, but it shouldn't be the end all be all. And a great example of this, it's actually one of my favorite communities that I'm a pretty active member in. It's called Product Marketing Alliance. It's a community of, depending on the way you define it, over like 15,000 different product marketers. And about a year and a half ago, they started out as a baby little Slack community. They were like 500 members, just chugging along, and boom, fast forward 18 months later, they have now vertically integrated into a full stack community. So starting with Slack, they now offer courses for product marketers. They have paid memberships. They have a podcast where they bring on product marketing experts every single week. They offer a credentialing program. They have local meetup chapters. They've since gone virtual given the pandemic, a blog and a newsletter. They have a resource library, virtual events, a job board. They issue research reports on the industry. I mean, they're now generating millions of dollars in revenue. They're the go-to place in the product marketing industry for all things product marketing related. And they started out with just a Slack community. So this is an example of how you can basically take a group of people, put them on a platform like Slack, and then evolve it to multiple different tools and experiences and more or less like a full stack media company. So if you're going to start a community on Slack, I challenge you to not think small, but think big, and how this can become much more than just a Slack.
And what sort of, using this as an example, what sort of time period was this over?
This was 18 months. So you have the ability to move this fast.
So did this start off as say like a free community, and then it evolved into offering paid and software and memberships and courses, etc.?
Yep. So I know the founder pretty well. It did start off as a free community. The Slack is still one of the free components. In fact, I think 90% of this is free, but they've now created an upsell mechanism where they charge extra for access to exclusive content and materials beyond just what's free.
So that's a really interesting use case. And we had a question from Ariane. Can you talk more about this initial phase of growth? How do you acquire members in this time?
Yeah, so I didn't start this community. This is just one that I'm an active member in. But the growth is certainly one of the most challenging things, right? Like it's not enough to have a shared reason for people to gather. You also have to be very proactive about the ways in which you promote this thing. And one of the best strategies that I've seen work really well, especially if you're building a community around a niche topic or an interest or an industry, is start with an audience. Start by being a content curator. I mean, there's just so much content and noise out there. If you can create value for people by aggregating and curating, a subset of content and kind of slice through the noise and build an audience around that can work. So I'll give you an example. When we were building the community club, which now has like 2,000 people on Slack, we actually started with a newsletter. So we went out and created a weekly roundup of the top 5 tweets in community building world and the top 5 blog posts in the community industry. And then we wrote like a sentence blurb at the top of the email. It took us an hour to create, and it ended up being some pretty high quality content. And we basically, manually invited the community builders in our network and asked a few influencers with big follower bases to share this thing. And next thing we know, after 30 days, we got it to 1,000 subscribers. And that's because it was valuable for people, right? There's a lot of community building noise and knowledge and resources out there, but we were able to basically cut through the noise, deliver the top 10 pieces of information that you need to see from that week. And we're able to growth hack that to 1,000 people by, like I said, manually inviting and getting a few influencers to share. Then once we had the audience, we're like, okay, let's take this a step further and let's introduce a many-to-many experience. Because remember at the beginning, I talked about how an audience, like a newsletter, is a one-to-one relationship between the subscriber and you. So we created a series of different virtual events that we would invite our newsletter subscribers to. So this is where we start to slowly drip in community and many-to-many experiences. So we had virtual Zoom happy hours, icebreaker events. That's another great community tool. And then after we had 3 or 4 of those, we decided to take the most loyal members who kept coming back for more and invite them to a Slack community. And that was an amazingly low friction thing to do, because these people had already been primed by the awesome content they were getting in our newsletter every single week. And they were taking the initiative to join our events, and they had a great experience at the events. You also have to create a good content for people in good events. You can't just deliver someone mediocrity and expect them to want to become a gung-ho member of your Slack. So that's what worked for us, and that's how we got our Slack to the first few hundred members. Was we built the audience through the methods I just described, slowly trickled in many-to-many virtual experiences, and then ultimately we provided a Slack community experience in the end for the most loyal users. And members got more members, and we started the growth flywheel from there. But that's how we laid the foundation in the first 60 days.
Love it. Yeah, there's been like a common thread through some of the sessions about, especially when in the early stages of community growth, just about those like one-to-one relationships. And yeah, they can just like self-perpetuate. If that one person that you dealt with is bringing one more and they're bringing one more, then it kind of grows on its own. But just curating those initial ones in the early stages seem to be like a common thread of building close-knit communities.
Absolutely. There's a reason it keeps getting brought up in all the sessions, and that's because it freaking works. But let's say, you've decided on Slack as a platform choice. You have an understanding of how you want to grow this thing, get your first 100 members. Let's talk about some housekeeping for tactically setting this thing up for success. Because I talked about this at the beginning, where Slack is not a purpose-built community platform. At the end of the day, it's a different use case than the product was originally intended for. So there's a few different tweaks and setting fixes that I highly recommend everybody who's running a community on Slack or starting a community on Slack should do in order to get optimum functionality. So here's 4 quick tips. Number 1, make sure that you always lock the ability to install third-party apps, as well as at the channel, send the at here, which are basically ways to mass message and mass notify people, invite other members, as well as create new channels. Lock all those things to the admin layer so that only you or your co-founders in the community or people that you elevate as moderators have the ability to do all of this. Otherwise, your community is going to get, it's going to run wild with folks kind of taking the initiative and spamming people, installing their app. You don't want to deal with that. You want to make sure that you address all of this up front. And it's 3 or 4 simple settings that you can tweak. In fact, I'd recommend you screenshot this page and make sure you go into your Slack permissions. It's pretty simple to do and check all these boxes. The second is if you're just starting your Slack community, what you should do if you're on the free plan is you should change the default general channel, which is one that Slack auto-populates when you spin up an instance, to an announcements channel, and lock the posting permissions to admin only. And this is a very nuanced tip, because on the Slack free plan, you only have the ability to lock the posting permissions on one channel, and that one channel is the default general channel from when you created the instance. And this is great because if you set it up right like this, you'll now have a dedicated announcements channel that only admins can post in. Now, people can also comment on the thread and reply to any announcement that you make, but it's a great place basically for you to be the sole voice and update your community proactively on updates and things that are happening. So I highly recommend you do number 2. Number 3, it's really best practice to make sure you hide the email addresses of every single community member on their profiles. Because again, Slack was a workspace collaboration tool, so by default they want to make emails a highly visible thing. But if you're building a community, you want to help respect members' privacy, so you don't want people's email addresses showing. And 4th, I think you should be super careful about naming the channels. And you also don't want to create too many channels. There's this concept in Slack community building world that I like to call Slack fatigue or channel fatigue. And that's where there's essentially way too many options for people. They don't know where to post because there's 80 channels and the channels are poorly named, and people have the ability, they've basically given the ability to their members to create whatever channels they want. And next thing you know, conversations being spread out over like 60 different places, as opposed to if you kept the conversation very focused and narrowly defined across like 5 to 8 different channels, engagement's going to be much higher. So again, this is just a very simple math equation, right? If you have 1,000 comments a month and those 1,000 comments are being spread across 80 different channels, that's a lot fewer than if you had 1,000 comments being spread across 8 channels. So it can give the appearance of higher engagement, and that, engagement is like a self-reinforcing feedback loop. So if it looks like there's more engagement, people are going to be more likely to engage. And if it doesn't look like there's more engagement, people are going to be less likely to engage. So you really want to be super careful about channel composition, channel naming, and making sure that there's a very clear purpose as to what people should talk about in each channel. So there's this concept of like a channel description at the very top, which I'd absolutely recommend you change. So the next thing that you should think about is onboarding for your community. So there's a number of different bots out there that can send a direct message to your members as soon as they join. Greetbot's a great one. It comes from a bot. You can populate the message to be like, hey, welcome to the community. This is what you can expect. Introduce yourself as the community manager, blah, 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 send them a link to your website or a PDF or whatever information you want them to grok. But the other thing I think that you should set up is a personalized welcome DM from you, the community leader. And Slack just launched this new workflow builder tool about 2 months ago. So if you go up into the top left corner, and again, maybe this is another good thing to screenshot, but if you go up into the top left corner of your Slack and you hit tools, workflow builder is the second line item that pops up. And once you click that, you'll basically have a series of different modules that you can create, or like workflows that you can set up. It's kind of like Zapier built natively into Slack. And one of them is a warm welcome for a teammate. So every time a new teammate or a new community member joins the Slack, you have the ability to set up an automated welcome DM that comes directly from you, the community manager. It's very personalized. It opens up a one-to-one communication thread. And this is a great way to personally get to know these people. Because even though the initial message when they joined is automated, they can then reply to you, right? Which is something different than Greetbot or an automated welcome DM. So you can kick off a conversation and get to know these people on a deeper level right off the bat on day one if you use this workflow automation. Another great tip is send a personalized onboarding video to folks. You could create one general one for the entire community, kind of walking folks through, hey, this is what to expect. It's 30, 45, 2 seconds, 2 minutes long, not a huge part of or time investment on the community members' part if they're going to watch it. Or if you think there's super high value people that are joining, or maybe you're just inviting your first 50 or 100 members to the community and you want to give them an extra level of intimacy, record a personalized Loom video. Mention them by name. Say, hey, Susan, it's amazing to have you here. Can't wait to see what you're going to contribute. We have all these resources for you. Check out this channel. Check out this on our website. Here's a link to a PDF if you want to see more. Blah 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 blah. So I think a personalized video with something like Loom, it's a really simple free service that you can use to record web videos, and it generates a URL. is a great way to do this. Another tactical tip is you want to make sure that all of your community members are signing into your Slack community on their desktop app and their mobile app. So when you first get a Slack invitation, what happens if you're on desktop or using something like Gmail and you accept it and create the account is it actually opens Slack in your browser. So now you're in the Slack community in a browser tab. So it's an extra step for folks to have to open their desktop app or their mobile app and click the little plus button on the bottom left here and sign into their workspace. So if they never actually went through that step and your Slack community got lost in their tab and they never bookmarked it, then guess what? They're not going to keep coming back because they're not going to remember what the URL or the domain of your community is, and you're not close to home in their desktop app workspace or their mobile app where they can see you all the time. So really, this goes back to the whole concept of like being a part of their engagement loop. So if you can get someone to sign into the workspace on desktop after joining and creating the community in the browser, that's a huge way to get folks to re-engage. Now, that's onboarding. The next thing I want to talk about is engagement. And maybe I'll pause there. Tom, are there any questions coming in from the chat?
2 seconds. Sorry, muted and taking myself off screen. No questions from the chat regards to the tips there, but I think those the channel tip was a really good one because I think like locking that announcement channel was something which we found really useful when we had the community over in Slack. And then also just to emphasize your point about the personal greeting messages through Loom. We saw like really good feedback when I have like a Zap set up for when somebody joins the MakerPad community that pings me inside of Slack. And then I just open up Zoom, record a 30-second welcome to MakerPad. It's obviously saying the name and then just sending it as like an email. That went down really, really well. Like got to meet people really quickly, build like a bit of rapport instantly. And also somebody actually ran a test. I shared that on Twitter that I was doing it and people found it good. And then somebody actually tested it as part of their sales cycle for people actually signing up to the paid version of their product or service and saw, I think, like a 4% bump in conversions, which actually translated to some real cash for the person. I'll try and dig out the thread, but they actually really work. So just spending that little bit of time to send something personal, I think, should be done if you can.
Yeah, it's a really, really great hack. And it really sets the cultural tone for the rest of their experience with the community, right? It's like the appetizer. I mean, if you don't get that, it's okay, but I think any extra juice that you can give folks is amazing, right? So if they don't hear from you, it's like if you went to a fancy restaurant and like you got seated and then the waiter didn't come to your table for 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if they have the best filet mignon in the world, or the best tuna tartare. If it took you 20 minutes to order in the first place, people aren't going to be very happy. It's going to sour the taste for the rest of their experience. So similar type of a phenomenon with the community.
Agreed.
So when it comes to engagement, one of the best tips that you can do in Slack right away, especially if you're just starting out, is create a bunch of threads so that people who are just joining, if these are your first 10, 15 members, have immediate content that they can sink their teeth into as well as contribute to. If they join a Slack community and there's nothing there, right, it's just blank channels, there's a high likelihood they're not going to engage, right? Because people are scared. They don't want to be the first ones to engage. They don't want to be the first ones to jump. Like we're creatures of mirroring, right? It's a lot more comfortable for people to want to join a conversation if there's already people talking. And you also want to make sure that people get value the second that they join. So if there's no threads or no content for them to consume, they're not going to get value. It's kind of like a heuristic that a lot of people think about in the SaaS world or the software world. And it's this whole concept of like time to value. So like when you buy a software product, what's the time to value that it takes for you, or the amount of time it takes for you to actually start feeling the benefit that the software is bringing to you. And if it's not quick, you're going to churn, right? You're not going to keep putting your credit card in every single month. Or if you're a company, you're not going to resubscribe. So it's a similar type of concept with the community. It's like, what is the time that it takes for this community member to really feel the value and the benefit and what they're getting out of the experience? So the more that you can pre-populate a community with a bunch of just conversation that you and maybe your co-founder or whoever, or maybe an early member that's your champion can get out there, or even if you have to fake it with fake accounts, like the Reddit guys did in the early days, that can work too. So, and we already talked about this, but again, going back to what Tom was talking about, in the early days, the majority of the community relationships are all between you and the members, right? You as the community leader and the members. You need to quickly scale that and make sure that you're connecting members. So you almost have to have like a CRM in your brain in a sense, and just know that, okay, Tom really likes this. I know that this person might be interested in that. Let me connect Tom and this person via DM. Or someone's asking a question, about a particular topic in one of the channel threads. You can actually reply in a thread and loop someone else in and say, hey, like, I think, Sally would have a great input here. Like, would love to hear your thoughts. And people are very willing to participate in this manner. And they're very open to not even having to opt in to joining a conversation. Right? I think that's the spirit of community. So I think as much as you can scale yourself and bring folks in and connect them amongst each other quicker, it's going to accelerate the flywheel. Another way to do this is just create a simple Airtable document or a spreadsheet in the early days and like track, okay, this is this member, this is what they're all about, this is where they work. Here's like 2 or 3 different, taxonomies or keywords or segments or things that they're interested in. And then you can just manually play matchmaker as the community leader. It's a very simple thing that you can do that has a very high ROI on your time when your community is sub 100 members.
One quick thing I'd like to ask, what would be a more advanced way of doing this? So let's say somebody's watching this replay and they already have like an established community. They want to do a better job of knowing and tracking information about their members, maybe like their activity, but also being able to like manually add information. So you can also be reminded that they obviously like logged in, these are their interests, so everyone can kind of see it in one place.
So that's a huge pain point, and something like that for a more advanced community, like a spreadsheet or an Airtable, just doesn't scale, and it's not automated, and there's no analytics. So that's actually the entire reason why we built the ComStore platform in the first place. It's basically a CRM and a 360-degree analytics view of all of your community members, how they're engaging, where they're engaging, and where you need to spend your time in order to maximize the engagement within the community and maximize the ROI that your community is providing if it's for business. So it's funny you ask that, because that's exactly the whole purpose behind why we built the platform after experiencing those pain points ourselves.
Yeah, it's a funny one because now this year community is becoming like increasingly popular. People are running into this like pain point like now and thinking, okay, this is actually like a gap in the software, because my community is getting like, say it's exceeded 100 members, and I used to like it when it was small because I used to know everybody and what they're working on, but like now I can't, and then maybe I feel bad about it, and now I have to like hand off stuff, or I feel like I'm neglecting members and I just can't gather that information. So
yeah, exactly. Tools like ComStore are your friends in those cases. It really allows you to scale yourself and repurpose your time on doing what matters, and that's actually relationship building, right? And interacting with other people and growing the community and putting on kick-ass experiences.
Got it. So we've got a session coming up soon with David where we're going to be diving into ComStore, so we'll be able to take a peek at that very soon.
Cool. Another great tip for scaling yourself on that note is create a simple moderator program. So for every channel that you have in your Slack, assuming you don't have too many, like I said, I don't recommend 80. I recommend you having more closer to like 8, is you can assign a member or put out an application for members that want to be channel moderators or channel masters. And people are oftentimes very, very willing to do this. And you can reward them, with free products, discounts to products, if it's something like MakerPad, maybe like a half-off subscription for the year, or swag. Or oftentimes, just the gold star and the feel good of like, hey, you get to actually have a voice and an input in this community. And here's a great example of a community that's done this well. They actually created, you know, a one pager just in Google Slides or on Canva that outlined, hey, this is what this person is all about. This is their background. This is going to be their responsibility. And then every time someone sends a message in this channel, they're the first one to reply to it. And they have a responsibility of like drumming up one post per week of an engagement. And it's a really effective way to scale yourself and establish a moderator program in a community. You could even have like a private channel within Slack to manage all of your different moderators and do like a quarterly catch-up Zoom call with them for 15 minutes to make sure you're all on the same page. And you know, this also becomes another way for you to get very candid feedback on what's working and what's not working, especially if these moderators or ambassadors are like your conduit to the rest of the members. So last two things I want to share on the engagement front is creating a content schedule and engagements and traditions. So once you have, you know, your first few hundred members and you want to make sure that people are talking, they're engaged, one of the best things you can do is in a spreadsheet or something like Airtable, you can actually create a content schedule, or you can create something like a question of the week framework where every single week or every single day or wherever the frequency is that you want to post things, you can type out the content ahead of time. So take 30 minutes, one day a week or one day a month, plan it all out. And then every day, just make sure you have a little reminder set on your calendar or on your phone to post, or in Slack, even you can use Slackbot to post that thing and mark when it's done. Simple as that. You've now saved a whole lot of time. You've put engagement more or less kind of on autopilot. And you've given members a like repeatable tradition that they can look forward to. Because again, we're creatures of habit when you think about community from a psychological perspective. And if a member can know exactly what they're going to get out of a community on a recurring, regular basis, they're going to be much more likely to engage in the long term. You could even take it a step further and have a different engagement plan for every single channel with, you know, attachments and pictures and images. So here's an example of a more advanced one that I use in a lot of communities that I run or helped other organizations set up. So if you want access to something like this, just DM me on Twitter. Tom, I think you have my Twitter username. Throw that in the Zoom chat, and I'm more than happy to send it to you.
Yep.
Another thing that you can do is create a weekly digest or a summary of all the best conversations that are happening in the Slack or whatever platform you're using. And in Slack specifically, you can create what's known as like a note or like a notepad. So if you do that, you can do sentences that are basically summaries of what's happened in the week. You can directly link back to conversations as like hyperlinks. So when people click on it, they get teleported back to a previous day in the chat to like an exact post. So this is a really great way to help people catch up on things that they missed, and then drive conversation back to threads that might have happened like a week or a week and a half before. And here's just a few other fun freebies that I wanted to throw out here for you guys. One of them is that you can actually create a custom color sidebar theme in Slack, which I don't know if a lot of you knew that, but it's one of my favorite things to do in any Slack community that I join or any Slack community that I'm helping set up or run. And the way to do that is just go up to the top left, settings, preferences, themes. And if you know anything about design or colors and how RGB values work and all of that, you can actually change the color scheme so that it can look something like this, which is a lot less boring than the standard purple and white that you oftentimes see when you join a Slack community.
We had a quick question from Ray, Jacob, if you don't mind. He said,
Yeah.
how did that weekly digest feature work, or was it manual?
So this person has put it together manually. There are a few apps out there. One of them I know is called Lowdown that puts this somewhat on autopilot. But I've heard from folks that have used tools like that it's actually a better experience for members if you curate a little bit more manually. You know, it takes like 30 to 40 minutes a week, but if it's going to increase your engagement by 10, 20% and, gives the ability for members to easily hop back in after they've missed things, I think it's very much worth the ROI of the time. And you can also copy and paste the same material and send it to people's inboxes, right? If you look at the text here in the middle, they actually have a workflow that they built out to add that newsletter direct to their email inbox. So not only are people seeing it in Slack, but they're also getting it emailed to them, which is another opportunity to get them to jump back into Slack if they haven't engaged in a while. So if you want to get people to come back to a community, find ways to hit them when they're not in the community. And then email inbox is a great way to do that.
Got it. Nice.
Yeah, so that's all the Slack community tips I had today. One thing I just want to throw out there is that Slack just dropped a merch item. So they did a partnership with Cole Haan, which is a shoe company. and they're creating Slack shoes. And I haven't bought mine yet, but given the fact that I am, at the top of the Slack internal leaderboard for number of Slack communities joined, I'm hoping they send me a free pair.
Yeah, you should be in line for a couple, I reckon. One for each community.
Be right back. I'm going to go tweet at Stuart Butterfield. But that's all I had for you guys today. One last takeaway that I just want to hammer home is that it's not about the community tool. It's more about how you use it. And it's people and purpose over platform any day. Like most communities, they really need these two fundamental things: a strong purpose for gathering and a strong purpose and reason for people to keep gathering, right, and to re-engage. And if you don't have either of those two things, it does not matter if you're using Slack or Discord or Circle or Discourse or whatever. Your community is not going to be successful. Yeah,
that was a kind of a common theme so far as well through all the things like mission first. If you haven't got a mission and people aren't like uniting around that shared mission, then your community isn't going to work no matter what platform you're on. So that's probably the main lesson I've learned so far through this program. Is there any other common like pitfalls to avoid when starting up and starting to grow a Slack community? It could be around things like posting or spamming or anything like that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just make sure that you are on top of it when it comes to spam and moderation, because there's a lot of freeloaders out there and a lot of people that just want to join your community to post something, hey, upvote my product on Product Hunt, or hey, subscribe to my newsletter. They're not going to ever plan on contributing anything of substance to your group. They're never going to plan there to be a long-term member. So you just have to have very clear rules and guidelines as part of your onboarding process. Maybe it's a separate part of your website that you can link people out to, kind of like a terms and conditions, or something you mention at the end of your Loom video that you send them, or something to include in the Greetbot or automated workflow DM that we talked about. So I think having clear terms and conditions, or maybe that's a terrible word, but guidelines or more or less. Rules. I don't like the word rules either because it makes it sound stuffy. But just community principles is a good way to think about it. Like, right, that people are abiding to. And one of them is just you want to be a contributor, not just a spammer and a freeloader. So I think that's something that you really have to look out for. And that's a kind of leads into a second pitfall, which is that people underestimate the amount of time that it takes to keep a community engaged and running and thriving. I mean, it is not something you can half-ass. It's not something you can spend 10% of your time on. It really more or less is a full-time job. There's a reason why almost every company now is thinking long and hard about hiring a full-time community manager or hiring a community team, more or less, right? Like that's one of my big beliefs of the future, is that every major software company or a company like MakerPad, they're going to have full-fledged community teams, because community is going to be the most important pillar of their business or their organization. Even for creators and influencers and people building audiences, I mean, community is going to be the number one contributor to your success moving forward. And it's not something that you can treat as a side project. You really have to go all in.
Yeah, it's actually one of our recent hires. So yeah, we kind of reached that stage where we felt like we needed to pay more attention, because there's more people are working on projects, so we had to review projects and people actually going through different like programs all the time. So yeah, it's been crucial for us and it's made like the world of difference. So yeah, I highly recommend it. We've got a couple of questions from Frank. First up, how do you think about the issue of Slack's pricing model? 10K max messages seems a significant drawback once the community grows. Paying per user gets expensive quickly for this use case. Heard through the grapevine they might introduce a community tier. Any intel on that?
Yeah, so I won't spill too much about any sort of community tier. I can't confirm nor deny whether or not I have inside information there. But I will say, like I said, I'm in 200 Slack communities. I gave you guys that example of Product Marketing Alliance, which is like 15,000 people now, and they're on the free tier. So it is possible to build a thriving community with the limitation of the 10,000 message limit. One way that I've seen folks not really get around it, but better manage it, the fact that like so much information and history is lost, is creating an awesome knowledge base. So it could start off with as something MVP as like a Notion document, where once a week you go through, figure out the best conversations or the best nuggets of insider knowledge that people are dropping, and then copy and paste them into Slack, and then Notion, right? Or a Word doc or a Google doc or something. And then long-term, you can turn that into a searchable, indexable knowledge base that lives on your website or in a dashboard if your community is built on something like MakerPad, the way MakerPad is. So that's how I think about
really
getting around it, as well as just, word of advice or word of caution. You don't need to be thinking that the message limit is a prohibiting factor in you scaling a big, successful Slack community.
Like that. It's going to cost you a pair of Slack trainers if you want to know the intel on the community tier.
Okay.
And he says, second one, any other useful Slack apps that help you better run your community except from Groupbot?
Ooh, I think one of the biggest ones is Zapier. I mean, there's just a lot of little things that you can automate. So one thing that I do, for example, is there's certain keywords that I always look for on Twitter that I want to make sure like I'm involved in that conversation. So I've set up a bunch of automations to send a DM to me on Slack when Zapier wants one of those tweets appears in the Twitter sphere. So I think Zapier is probably one of my favorite ones, just because it's so flexible and so customizable. And MakerPad's a great place to learn, how to get maximal usage out of something like that.
We've got also, I would recommend if you're looking to automate stuff in Slack, then head over to Integromat as well. So the nuance between like Integromat and Zapier in relation to Slack is they go much deeper down the API. So you can do a lot more. So you can trigger things off when a user is like online or when they do lots of different stuff. So Zapier has like limited amounts of like triggers and actions, where I think Integra might go a lot further down the API. So you can actually do a lot more things. If you really want to get into the weeds and do some real custom functionality, you can do that. Another one that I like, which we've used and lots of tutorials using before, is FlowXO for Slack bots, which are good, which you can trigger some. Don't know how useful it'll be now considering like workflows and stuff, but yeah, they're really good to trigger stuff based off of like keyword mentions and responses and things. So yeah, you can get quite funky with automation in Slack. Mayank asks, how do you map a journey of a user on community?
How do you map a journey of a user in a community? So I think it's tough without a great degree of like, marketing automation type tools, which, admittedly, this is another reason why we decided to build Comscore in the first place, is because there's no real window into that type of view right now, unless you use a tool like ours. But I think one thing you can do is just start with a simple flow diagram on, pen to paper, or something like Mira is another great tool for diagramming, where you basically map out like, hey, this is the intended journey of a user, right? We want people to discover us through social, this channel that we're promoting on the website, and then we want to funnel them here to our application process using something like Typeform. Then we're going to send them a manual Slack invite, and we're going to send them an email. And once they join the Slack, we want to make sure they get an automated DM. Then we want to make sure we hit them with a Loom video. And then ideally, we get them to introduce themselves within the first week and set their profile picture, because therefore they're going to be more engaged as we learn. So you can map that out just on a flow diagram and make sure that you're kind of eyeballing the fact that flow is happening and it's optimal. And who knows, you might find out that there's some bottlenecks or things you need to add into the journey. But I think it can be as simple as like something you draw it on a piece of paper, or something you diagram up on a platform or tool like Mira.
Is there any steps that say if people are going to go away now and they'll be looking at their entire like community flow and be trying to bring in more members? Are there any like essential steps for those, either a couple of steps before people join a community, like how to encourage someone to join? So one thing I did notice about the Comscore site, it says if you're not ready to sign up, then please join the community. I thought that was really good. So is there something that you'd recommend doing before, like to get somebody to sign up to a community? And also, what are the kind of the crucial things to happen, apart from like creating a profile, to happen like as soon as somebody joins?
That's an amazing question. I'd say it's three things. One, they need to know very explicitly what they're getting out of the community and why they should join, and understand if it's for them. Like, you get people joining communities all the time that are just like, oh, this is a cool sounding thing, let me check out this link, or and they don't really get primed. But if you have a beautiful landing page that describes, hey, this is what the community is all about, this is the type of person that we're creating value for, and if they're reading it and it resonates with them and they're the right type of person, they're gonna be like, wow, like dots are gonna start to connect in their brain, and they're gonna be like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And then you funnel that down to an application process or a join link or something like that. And if you can prime them with a landing page that really does what I just described, they're probably going to be much more likely to join and engage, because they actually understand what they're getting out of this community, right? They understand the purpose and reason for gathering. And then the second and third things are how you get people to re-engage. Because remember that the framework for community is reason to gather, reason to keep gathering, right? Like reason to keep coming back for more. It's not enough to get people to sign up. You got to get them to sign up every day, basically, right? Or every week, and keep contributing. So the second thing is you want to make sure that they go through your onboarding process, and that could be something as simple as making sure they get the Loom video, making sure they set the profile picture, making sure they send an introduction within the first week in the introductions channel. And the third thing is some form of proof that they're there to stick around for the long haul. Because there's a lot of people that will take that step, like set a profile picture, introduce themselves, but then never actually attend any events, right? Or they forget about the community. So if you can hit them, in week 2 with an invite to an event, or on week 2 to get them to post a question, or on week 2 send them a personalized message to say, hey, like notice you haven't contributed yet. Would love to hear your thoughts on the XYZ topic. That's the framework for success. It's basically make sure that they're psychologically primed to know that they're going to get value out of this community, get them to take those first baby steps by setting their profile picture, getting their feet wet, setting the foundation, and then getting them to engage at least once in a meaningful way. And they're much more likely to stick around and be a core contributor as opposed to someone that just joins and leaves or forgets about it.
Love it. That's incredible. Jacob, I think that's a really good place to end. Bang on the money. I think there is a ton of really useful and very practical tips in there, which you can actually just go away and apply straight away. So really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us all. I think, there's some really useful stuff that we can apply immediately. And talked about some tools, all the tools that we mentioned, we posted on the thread, as well as a replay straight after this session. And also we've got the ComSor session coming up, so we can explore that piece of software, which is created by Jacob, which can link all this stuff together about engagement in the community. And you can kind of see how this conversation will shape that. So thanks very much for everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Jacob, thanks again for being very generous with your time. I know you're a very busy man, so we really appreciate it. And hopefully we can speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom. I had so much fun. And if anybody listening wants to chat further, I'm just a Twitter DM away. So here's my URL. Take care, everyone. Thanks again, Tom.
Amazing. See you later. Bye, everyone.